Eric Burdon. You won't believe how a 15-minute recording session created one of the biggest songs in rock history, and quietly sparked a feud that would haunt a band for decades. Imagine this. Five young musicians walk into a London studio. They're exhausted, broke, and running on almost no sleep. They have barely enough time to set up before they have to jump back on the road. 15 minutes later, they record a song that will change music forever. But here's the twist. The song earns millions. Only one member ends up controlling most of the money. And the friendships that helped create the record never recover. This is the remarkable story behind House of the Rising Sun, a song that launched a musical revolution, inspired future legends, and left behind a controversy that still gets talked about more than 60 years later. To understand how everything went wrong, we have to go back before the fame, before the money, and before anyone knew they were sitting on a hit. The song itself wasn't new. In fact, nobody even knows exactly who wrote it. House of the Rising Sun had been floating through American folk traditions for generations. Different singers performed different versions. Lyrics changed. Melodies shifted. Over time, the original creator disappeared into history. By the early 1960s, the song had become part of the public domain folk tradition. One of the artists who recorded it was Bob Dylan. His version appeared on his debut album, and followed the traditional folk style of the era. It was acoustic, simple, and haunting. But then a British rhythm and blues band from Newcastle heard it. That band was the Animals. And they had a completely different idea. Instead of treating the song like an old folk ballad, they imagined it with electric guitars, powerful organ chords, and a dramatic vocal performance. It was a risky idea. At the time, folk music and rock music were often viewed as separate worlds. Nobody knew that combining them would help create an entirely new sound. The arrangement that eventually emerged was unforgettable. The opening guitar pattern pulled listeners in immediately. The organ created tension and atmosphere. And when the lead vocal arrived, it sounded less like a performance and more like someone confessing a lifetime of regret. The band knew they had something special. What they didn't know was that the business side of the song would become far more important than anyone expected. Before any arguments about money began, however, the band still had to record the track. And they almost didn't have enough time. In May 1964, the Animals were traveling non-stop across Britain on an exhausting tour schedule. They were sharing bills with major performers and spending endless hours moving from city to city. Life on the road wasn't glamorous. There were long train rides, little sleep, and constant pressure to perform. During a brief stop in London, producer Mickey Most arranged studio time. The schedule was incredibly tight. The band had to get in, record, and leave. There would be no luxury sessions, no endless experimentation, no weeks of refinement, just one chance. As the story goes, the musicians stepped into the studio and started playing. Lead singer Eric Burdon approached the microphone. Guitarist Hilton Valentine began the now famous chord progression. The rest of the band joined in. And something magical happened. The performance clicked immediately. Everyone was locked in. The emotion felt real. The energy was undeniable. When the song ended, they had essentially captured lightning in a bottle. One take, one performance. Roughly 15 minutes of studio time. That's all it took. Today, many legendary recordings are famous because they required months of work. This one became legendary because it happened almost instantly. But another problem appeared the moment the recording was finished. The song was too long. Much too long. At the time, radio stations strongly preferred short singles. Most hit songs were around 2.5 minutes. House of the Rising Sun stretched well beyond 4 minutes. Industry executives saw danger. Radio programmers might refuse to play it. Disc jockeys could skip over it. The record company worried they had an unmarketable product. Pressure quickly mounted to shorten the track. Cut sections. Trim the arrangement. Make it fit the industry standard. But the band pushed back. They believed the song worked because of its slow build and emotional journey. Cutting it apart would destroy the atmosphere, so they fought to keep it intact. Looking back now, it seems obvious they made the right decision. At the time, however, it was a huge gamble. Nobody could predict what happened next. The song exploded. It didn't simply become popular, it became a phenomenon. Listeners everywhere connected with its dark mood and powerful storytelling. The record climbed charts on both sides of the Atlantic. Soon, it reached the #1 position in both the United Kingdom and the United States. For a young band from Newcastle, it was the kind of success most musicians only dream about. But the song's influence stretched even further. One of the people paying attention was Bob Dylan. According to accounts from music historians and comments Dylan made over the years, hearing the electric version had a profound effect on him. He realized that traditional folk songs could thrive in a louder, more modern format. The walls separating folk music and rock music suddenly seemed much smaller. Of course, no single artist invented folk rock. Many musicians were experimenting at the same time. Groups like the Byrds would also play a major role. Still, House of the Rising Sun became one of the clearest demonstrations that folk material could work brilliantly with electric instruments. The song helped accelerate a movement that would reshape popular music. Yet while audiences celebrated the record, tensions were quietly growing within the band. And those tensions centered on something few young musicians fully understood: publishing rights, songwriting credits, royalty structures, the boring legal details that often decide where the money goes. Because the original folk song existed in the public domain, the arrangement carried enormous value. Whoever received credit for arranging the song could potentially earn significant publishing income. According to various accounts over the years, there had been discussions about sharing credit among the group. However, when the record was released, only one name appeared as arranger. That name belonged to Alan Price, the band's keyboard player. The reasons behind that decision remain debated. Some explanations point to practical issues involving record labels and publishing paperwork. Others emphasize management involvement and the confusion surrounding music industry rules at the time. What is clear is this: most members of the band did not fully understand the financial consequences. They were young musicians focused on performing. Contracts and publishing agreements felt distant and abstract. But once the song became a worldwide hit, those details suddenly mattered. A lot. Royalty payments began arriving. And the imbalance became impossible to ignore. While all band members benefited from touring and performance income, publishing royalties followed a different path. Because Alan Price held the arrangement credit, he received the publishing income connected to that arrangement. As the song generated more revenue through sales, broadcasts, licensing, and future uses, the gap became increasingly visible. Resentment started building. Especially for Eric Burdon, whose vocal performance had become one of the most recognizable sounds in rock history. From his perspective, the song belonged to the entire band. From a legal standpoint, things were much more complicated. The result was a disagreement that never fully disappeared. Then came another shock. Only about a year after the song's release, Alan Price left the group. Official explanations included health concerns and the pressures of touring. But many observers also pointed to growing tensions surrounding money and publishing rights. Whether those disputes were the sole reason for his departure remains debated. What isn't debated is that relationships inside the band had been damaged. Trust was fading. The sense of unity that helped create the hit was slipping away. The remaining members tried to move forward. They continued recording. They continued performing. They brought in new musicians. But some wounds are difficult to heal, especially when money enters the picture. The original lineup never truly regained the bond they once shared. Years passed. Decades passed. the song remained immortal. New generations discovered it through radio, films, television shows, streaming services, and live performances. Meanwhile, the story behind the recording became part of rock and roll folklore. People argued about who deserved what, who made the right decision, who made the wrong one, and whether the entire situation could have been avoided with clearer communication. Perhaps the biggest lesson is surprisingly simple. Many bands spend endless hours perfecting their music. Far fewer spend time understanding the contracts attached to it. Creative partnerships often run on trust. Business arrangements run on paperwork. When those two realities collide, friendships can suffer. Even extraordinary success cannot always repair the damage. Today, Eric Burdon continues to be associated with the song that helped define an era. His voice remains inseparable from its legacy. And every time audiences hear those opening chords, they're reminded of a recording session that lasted only minutes, but left an impact measured in generations. It's one of the great ironies in music history. A song about hardship, regret, and lost opportunities became one of the most successful recordings of its time. And behind that success stood a group of young musicians who changed popular music forever, while struggling to keep their own relationships intact. Maybe that's why the story still fascinates people. It's not just about royalties. It's not just about contracts. It's about ambition, trust, misunderstanding, and the price of success. Sometimes the biggest battles in music don't happen on stage. They happen after the applause ends. So what do you think? Was this simply a consequence of complicated publishing rules? Or was it a costly mistake that should never have happened? Share your thoughts below. And if you enjoy untold stories from music history, the moments behind the songs, the rivalries, the breakthroughs, and the legends, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes, the story behind the music is even more fascinating than the music itself.